Yesterday we began discussing the case of Pigul when he has a machshava to eat the kometz chutz lizmano in a case of kometz, which is not even royal achila. What do we do with kometz? We burn it. That's what we do haktara. That's all we do with the kometz. Well, for example, let's say he has a machshava of chutz lizmano for the shirayim at when he will burn the shirayim, but we don't burn shirayim, we eat shirayim. So the Chacham say that's not pigul, and Rabbi Eliezer says no, that is pigul. Now the Gemara is going to offer two interpretations of Rabbi Eliezer. According to Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Eliezer is talking about a doraisa and a chiv kares. According to another opinion, which is Rabbi Lazar without a yud, Rabbi Lazar says that Rabbi Eliezer only was talking about a drabanan, which makes a lot more sense. But we still have the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda that Rabbi Eliezer is talking about a pigul doraisa with an isa kares. Now, how do you get pigul for something that's not dark on the yesterday we had a whole discussion where he wants to eat piecemeal, sesame seed by sesame seed. We said that's not the derech achila, and that's not pigul. The thing about pigul that's very unique is that it's almost perfect, except for that machshava of chutz lizmano, but otherwise everything fits into place. Well, what do you mean everything fits into place? He's talking about a machshavas achila on kometz or machshavas haktara on shirayim. That's a total mess up. So this shita Rabbi Eliezer, the way Rabbi Yehuda understood it, is what I call a tzarech yigo. It really defies our understanding. Okay, now we go on to a very interesting discussion about Chag HaShavuos. So on Chag HaShavuos, we have Be'al Lechem, that's the featured korban of Atzeres, of Shavuos, and we have Kivsei Atzeres. Those are the kvasim, the lambs that have to accompany the Shtei Lechem. Now, what happens is that the shechita of the kvasim is going to be matir, the achila of the Shtei Lechem. So we have now a situation of a matir and a nitar, which is exactly what pigul is all about. So let's say at the moment that he shechts the kvasim, he has in mind that he's going to eat the shtei lechem chutz lizmano. In that case, the shtei lechem themselves become pigul with an isa kares. If he eats the shtei lechem in such a case, he will get kares for that. But now the issue is, what happens if his machshava at the time of the shchitas hakvasim was on one of the two lechamim, right? We said there are two shtei lechem. What happens if he had in mind at the time of the shechita that he'll eat one of the two of the shtei lechem outside of its time frame? Now, obviously, in such a case, the korban is possible, and both lechamim are possible because unless you have two lechamim, you have nothing. One is equal to zero. The chachamim say that in such a case, there's pigul with an isa kares, not only on that one lechem that he had in mind to eat chutz lizmano, but on both lechem. Why? Because the two lechems now become a unit. However, Rebbe disagrees. And he says that no, with regard to the lechem that he had in mind to eat chutz lizmano, that generates a chiv kares. But the other lechem, although it's possible, because it's an all or nothing endeavor, you need two and not one, but it's only a chiv lav, it's not a chiv kares. It's not pigul, because he didn't have a machshavas pigul on the other lechem. So he's got lechem A and lechem B. So he had in mind when he shechted the kvasim that lechem A will be eaten tomorrow and lechem B will be eaten today. And we're holding now that this is pigul, but pigul vis-a-vis what? Logically, I would have said it's pigul vis-a-vis A, but not vis-a-vis B, because he had in mind that he would eat B within the time frame. There was no machshavas chutzes mano on B. And yet the Rabbanan are of the opinion that there is pigul on both lechamim, even on the one that he didn't think of chutzes mano. However, Rabbi Yossi disagrees, and he says, no, if it's the lechem that he had in mind chutzes mano, that's pigul, and that's a chiyuv kares. But on the other lechem, again, it might be possible because it's, as we said before, it's too robust, but it's not kares, it's not pigul. Now we have another case where at the time of the shchitas hakvasim, he had in mind to eat a chatzi zayis from each one of the two lechamim chutz l'zman. And we said that there's no pigul on a chatzi zayis. But here he's got a pigul, machshavas pigul on a full zayis, just that it's a half a zayis from one lechem and a half a zayis from the other lechem. So the Gemara says that in such a case, even Rabbi Yossi, who, if you recall, said that there's only kares vis-a-vis one of the two lechamim, if he had in mind chutzes mano on one lechem, in this case, even Rabbi Yossi would agree that there is pigul with an isa kares on each chatzi zayis. And the reason for this is because the Torah sometimes considers shtei alechem as two different objects or two different entities. Like, for example, the pasuk says in Vayikra Chaf Gimel, it says shtayim shnei esronim. The Torah calls it two separate entities. But elsewhere, the Torah considers the shtei alechem as one entity, as guf echad. And that's the pasuk that says soles tihiyena. Now, how do we reconcile these two formulations? Is it shtei alechem as guf echad or shtei alechem as two different gufim? And the answer is that we're going to derive from this that both, since it says soles tiyena, combining the two into one, they're ma'akvim zetzeh, and we need both of them. As we said before, you can't have one without the other. But what do we do with the pasuk that calls it shtayim shnei esronim, separating each lechem? Eitzad el shem im chishev al shneim machshava achas kigon lechel kezayis mishnei alechamim yachad chutz lizmano hareim kigufa ed mitztarfim l'shir kezayis l'schayev v'pigul. So if he had in mind to eat a kezayis from the two lechamim, meaning a half a zayis from each lechem, chutz lizmano, then since they're considered guf echad and the Torah calls them soles tiyena, therefore we are mitzaref the shear of kezayis from half a zayis of one lechem together with the half a zayis of another lechem, and he's chayav for pigul. But if he only had a machshava on one of them to eat it chutz l'zmano, then we're going to apply the principle of shtayim, meaning that they're two different gufim, and therefore he's not chayiv kares on the other one because of his machshava chutz l'zmano on the first one. And in that case, we're going to apply the principle of shtayim. Again, if he has in mind that from these two lechamim he will eat a kezayis chutz l'zmano and a half a zayis from each lechem, then we're going to apply the principle of soles tiyena, that it's one entity, and we're going to be mitzaref, we're going to sew together and integrate a half a zayis from each lechem. But if, on the other hand, he has in mind only chutz l'zmano on one of the two lechamim, then Rabbi Yossi insists that's not a machshavas pigul, and there's no isur kares, because then we apply the principle of shtayim Shayim Shnei Yisro. Okay. Now, there are two kvasim and two lechavim. What happens if at the time that he shechts one of the two kvasim, he has in mind that he will eat a chatzi zayis from one lechem, and then he went ahead and he shechted the second keves, and he had in mind to eat a chatzi zayis chutzuzmano on the second lechem. And the Chachamim say in this case, there's pigul. Why? Because as we said before, the Torah considers solas tiena both lechamim as one entity. And therefore, if he had a machshava v'chatzi zayis on each lechem, then we're mitzaref. However, Rebbe says ein mitzaref. Why? Because in this case, he shechted one kevis with a machshava of chutzis mano and chatzi zayis, and then he shechted another kevis with a machshava on a chatzi zayis chutzis mano, and that separates the two and blocks the possibility of tzira.
Why is that?
Because since he did two different shchitos, the first case that we had before, let's go over it one more time. In the first case, when he shechted both kvasim, both kivsei atzeres, he had in mind half his zayis chutzim komo on one lechem and half his zayis of chutzim komo, chutzim mano on the other lechem. So the Rabbanan say, okay, you had that machshava during the entire course of the matir, which is the shchita of both kvasim, and we can be mitzaref the two because the Torah calls it soles tiena, one entity.
Okay.
But in this case, he separated the two shchitas, and the chatzi zayis of achila on the lechem of each of the two lechamim were on two shchitos respectively. So when he shechted one keves, he had in mind a chatzi zayis of one lechem, chutzim koho, chutzim mano, and when he shechted the other keves, he had a machshava of another chatzi zayis of the other lechem, chutz lizman.
In the first case, the shechting was together at the same time.
And he had the same identical machshava on each lechem, meaning chatzi zayis in each lechem, during the entire course of the shechita of both kvasim. In the second case, he separated, and he had a machshava on chatzi zayis for one shechita, and then another machshava on the other chatzi zayis for the other lechem in the second shechita. Again, Rebbe says it's pigul. I'm sorry, the Chachamim say it's pigul. I get the names mixed up. Rebbe says it's not pigul. Okay, now we go on to the next case. Is there a pigul on the matir itself, like inherent in the matir? In other words, until now, we've been separating between the komets and the shirayim. And the chiyuv pigul in a mincha is a machshav at the time of the komets for the shirayim. So when he was separating the komets or he was burning the komets, he had in mind that the shirayim should be eaten chutz l'zmano. That's called pigul because you're going from a machshava of a matir to a machshava first for a nita, right? The komet is matir the shirayim. But now we're talking about the following case, where the matir itself should become osir and pigul. So at the time of the let me just read the language. Ein chiv kares b'mincha shenispagla. Right, so he had a machshava during the komets to eat the shirayim chutz's man. So his machshava people was on the shirayim, which makes sense because the komets itself is burnt on the mizbeach. So the matir had a machshavas pigel on the nita, and therefore the shirayim themselves are asur b'chiv kares as pigel. But now, what happens? He had a machshavas pigel at the time of the kmitza that'll eat the shirayim chutz l'zmanom, and then he went ahead and he ate the komets. Instead of burning the komets on the mizbeach, he ate the komets. Is there a din of pigul, a status of pigul on the komets itself, which is the matir? Which would mean that by eating the komets, he incurs a chiv karetz. I mean, it's a very severe violation. It says, ein chiv karetz b'mincha, in a case of a mincha shenispagla, meaning it was pigul, ela al achilas shirayim, he's chayiv karetz for eating the shirayim, v'lo al achilas ha-komets. There's no chiv karetz on the komets itself.
You didn't have any intent. Isn't pigul the intent to do it outside? He had no intent to do it outside on the comments. The fact that he ate it doesn't make it pigul. That's what I'm hearing.
You want to say that there was no machshavas pigul on the komets. He only had a machshavas pigul on the shirayim, and therefore there's no chiv kares on the komets.
Yeah, his action was wrong, but he didn't have any specific. He didn't have pigul intent on the comments. He just did it wrong. My understanding, pigul is the intent, so he didn't have the intent. He had the intent on the other one.
I'll tell you the truth. He doesn't spell out exactly what his intention was. That's what bothers me. There's a certain ambiguity here. He says just that you ate the komets and ein chiyuv kares on achilas hakomets. What exactly was his machshava mefagelos? He doesn't spell out. But I think that the havamina here, that he should be chayiv kares for eating the komets, would be that the komets is part of one entity that's made up of two parts. There's a mincha that's comprised of komets and shirayim. If the shirayim are pigul, then one could ostensibly have argued that the komets itself is also pigul. Now, if you recall, we said that if a Kohen brings his own mincha, the mincha of a Kohen is kulo koli. It's completely burnt on the mizbech. There's no shirayim at all. He says, "Ein chiyuv kares al achilas minchas Kohen shenispaglo, shari kulo kolil v'ein bo matir v'nita." In other words, just like they can't be pigul on the komets because it's burnt on the mizbeach, and we only apply the rule of pigul when there's a matir and a nitar. In the case of Minchas Kohen, we have no nitar because the entire carbon, the whole mincha, is burnt on the mizbeach. I'm not exactly sure again what the case is. He doesn't flesh it out. At the time of the comets, he had in mind that he would eat the mincha. I mean, there are no shirayim to eat, but maybe he thought he would eat the mincha and he would eat it chutzes mana. Or maybe he had in mind that no, that's not right. I was going to say he had in mind to be maktir the mincha chutzes mana. Rishonim b'minchas kohanim yesh kasu shehismato rak michiv kares v'yesh kasu shehismato mi'etzem psul pigur. So we've discussed many times that Pigul has two dimensions to it. It's a machshava potzeles, and it's also, in a case of mefagelis, you generate a shame Pigul. You create a new entity called Pigul with a few kares, and these two might be separated one from the other. You could have a Pigul which only disqualifies the zevach, but doesn't generate a chiv kares. It's not a full-fledged pigul, it's a half-baked pigul. Like, for example, a machshava chutzum koma. We said the machshava chutzum koma does not engender a chiv kares. It's only pigul as far as psul is concerned. So now we're excluding the komets itself from pigul. Which din are we excluding it from? Are we saying the komets is excluded from the whole entity of pigul because it's a davar matir, not a davar nitar? Or are we saying that will suspend the halach of chiv kares of pigul, but nevertheless we still remain with the basic fundamental psul of the karb? So that's machlokas rishon. All right, let's go on. Now he shechted the kivsei atzeres, and he's going to eat the kvasim chutz lizmana. So he didn't have any machshava on the shtei lechem. He only had a machshava on the basar of the kvasim. But if you remember, we said before that the kvasim and the shtei lechem are one entity. And that's going to come to the fore here, because once he has machshavas pigul at the time of the shchitas hakvasim, then even with regard to the shtei lechem, which are part of this entity, and even though he didn't have machshava of chutzes mano on the lechamim, nevertheless the shtei lechem become pigul with an isikaris. It's a radical chiddush. Meaning, kevan shakvasim mispaglim is af shtei lechem mispaglim imohem. So like a greirer, we're all part of this together. You know, if you drill a hole in a ship, not only you'll drown if the water comes in, but everybody else in the ship will drown. So the Shtei Alechem are in the same ship as the Kivsei Atzeres. And even though he didn't have a machshava poselis of chutzis mano on the lechem is schlepped along by the Kivsei Atzeres. And what happens if he had a shechita? Almanas lechol es lechem eshtei lechem chutzis mano. Would that go in the other direction? And therefore, there's pigul even on the kvasim. We said if it was mafagel on the kvasim, that generates a pigul, status of pigul on the shtei lechem. What if he was mafagel on the shtei lechem? Almanas, right? Almanas lechol eshtei lechem chutzis mano. What's the status of the kvasim? We said that lechem is nigrar achar kvasim. Does the other way work as well? That the kvasim on nigrar basar the shtel lechem? And the answer is no. He says that the kvasim is ikar, and the lechem is tafel, and therefore you cannot generate a psul pigul on the kvasim from the lechem. It's really interesting because I would have said the exact opposite, that the shtel lechem is the ikar. Now we're saying no, that if there's pigul in the shtel lechem, that doesn't impact on the kvasim. Who had din the lachme toda? Oh, we have a very parallel case in lachme toda, because we have a shchita of the carbon, and then we have the achilas halachavim. So chishev al hatoda so chishev al hatoda, the ikar is the toda, and therefore machshavas pigul on the toda itself to eat the carbon toda chutz mano, which generates pigul on the toda, the basar toda, now will generate an isur pigul with the chi of karis on the lechem that accompanies the toda. What about the other direction? Avolim chishev ala lechem. Eina toda mispagelis. The toda, which is the ikar, remains shera. It's not pigul. And finally, chishev b'shash shchitas kivsei atzeres lechol chatzi zayis mibesaram chutz zmanon the chatzi zayis me'alechem. Beautiful. At the time of the shchitas kivsei atzeres, he had in mind two chatzi zaysim, one of basar from the kivsei atzeres and one of lechem from the shtei lechem. I would have said in this case for sure there's no tziruf, but let's see. He says nechleku amoroim bedino lidas rav hakvasim eno mispaglim ve'alechem mispaglim. All right, we'll have to take that off. This is fascinating. Okay. Organize myself and we'll open up the Gemara in Yom.